A very warm good morning to everyone and welcome. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on financial literacy presented by Rupani Foundation USA. I'll be your host Dilshad Meghani and I'm excited for everyone, including myself, to gain fruitful knowledge from today's guest speaker. Today's webinar is going to present in English and Spanish. For this purpose, Victoria Salinas will be interpreting the whole webinar in Spanish. Anyone who would like to listen to this webinar in Spanish can turn on the Spanish translation mode by clicking on interpretation button towards the bottom of your screen on the Zoom. This option is only available on the Zoom screen. Joining us today is founder and the president of the non-profit organization Career Spring, Mr. Paul Posoli. Today, he will be addressing the following topics: budgeting, saving money, and avoiding debt. Once again, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your day to join us. I just want to quickly mention that if you have any questions throughout this webinar, whether they be tech related or related to the presentations, you may ask them in the chat box and you will do our best to assist you as soon as possible. We have ourselves a full agenda today. First, we have introduction of our panelist and guest speaker, which will happen in just a moment. After that, we will review our webinar guidelines that are made to facilitate your participation in today's webinar. Then our speaker will share his presentation with us. There will be some quick poll questions in between the speaker's presentation, and I request you all to please try your best to actively participate and share your responses with us. We encourage you to use the Q&A box for the questions you want to ask from the speaker related to the presentation, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. Lastly, we will wrap up the webinar with a few acknowledgements. Moving on to our webinar guidelines. All attendees will be muted to ensure audio clarity for both the guest speaker and our panelist. Over the next 60 minutes, we encourage everyone participation through both the chat box and the Q&A box, so feel free to type your concerns and your questions in the boxes towards the bottom of your screen. I know today's topic is one that will bring up plenty of questions from everyone, myself included. So please be patient as we try to get through all of your questions in a timely and orderly fashion. Please note that today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on our social media platforms within the next week. Finally, we request that you take a minute of your time at the end of the webinar to complete a brief survey in regards to your experience today. Rupani Foundation USA is very thankful to have our amazing panelists and guest speaker here with us today. As mentioned in our mission statement, it's our goal to create a sustainable society for future generations. And what better way to do that than by informing the wonderful parents that raise their children with the help of our experts on various issues. I would like to formally welcome Rupani Foundation's founder and the chairman, Mr. Nasruddin Rupani, Mr. Dominic Ferrino, Ms. Victoria Salinas, and our guest speaker, Mr. Paul Posoli. A huge thank you to all of you for being here today. Now, I would like you all to hear from our operations officer, Dominic Ferrino, to share his speech on behalf of Rupani Foundation USA. Mr. Ferrino, please.
Good morning, and thank you, Ms. Dilshad. Thank you, Mr. Posoli, for being here today. Just wanted to give a little background on the foundation. The Rapani Foundation is a nonprofit organization that is encouraging and empowering our youth and our beneficiaries in the Houston area, along with refugees and minorities, to get out there and be a part of the world. And this webinar today will help them understand the value of money and establishing savings and credit, and how they can apply that to their daily lives. Rapani Foundation has been around and is expanding exponentially. And we're proud to have Mr. Posoli here today and giving his presentation and informing us and our community the value of financial literacy. Thank you, Ms. Victoria, for doing the translations in Spanish. We're very happy to reach another part of our community, the Spanish-speaking audience. With that being said, I'll turn it back to you, Ms. Dilshad and Victoria, to continue this great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferino. Now, I would like to offer a quick biography on Mr. Posoli and his many accomplishments throughout the years. Paul Posoli is the founder and the president of Career Spring, a networking and placement platform for first-generation students. He recently served for 5 years as president of Cristo Rey Jesuit College Preparatory School of Houston, which provides a college preparatory education and work-study program to approximately 540 students of limited economic resources. Before taking the role at Cristo Rey Jesuit, Paul spent 20 years as a leader in the energy industry. He served as president of Bear Stearns Energy Trading Business, president of Calpine Energy Services, and most recently, as managing director of JP Morgan's Global Commodities Group. Mr. Paul came to Houston to join Enron Capital and Trade Resources from Chicago, where he received his MBA from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. He began his career as a CPA at Coopers and Lybrand after receiving his BBA from the University of Miami. Paul serves on the advisory boards of Orion Energy Partners, a credit-oriented private equity firm focused on energy, and Loud Travel Stops and Country Stores. He is also a member of President Council for the University of Miami. Before I turn it over to Mr. Posoli, I would like for you all to answer a quick poll questions that's going to be pop up on your screen in just a second. Let me pull up the poll question for you on Zoom screen. Make sure all the participants on the Zoom screen can see this question. Okay, I'm going to read a question for you. It says, what are some consequences of spending more than you earn? You have 3 options: an easy way to accumulate debt, to stay out of debt, and both A and B. So let me wait for your responses. You can choose one of them or you can choose any of them. So let's see what's going to be your responses. I'm giving you a moment to click on your responses as well. Okay, got it. Thank you for your participation. Let me share the results with you. I have 60% of attendees are saying that an easy way to accumulate debt. So we have 20% are agreed with to stay out of debt and 20% are agreed with option A and B. Thank you for your participation in our first poll. I will now turn it over to Mr. Posoli. Mr. Posoli, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that kind introduction. I'm going to share my screen so that viewers can follow along on the presentation. Can you see that okay? Still
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, this is the financial literacy class, and you know, I'm really pleased to be here and support Rupani Foundation. You do such great work, and what I found in my time, you know, we talked a little bit about the introduction. I'm going to need to make sure that I've got my slide here working properly. For some reason, doesn't want to. There we go. I did spend most of my career in the energy business, but I had the opportunity to lead a high school called Cristo Rey Jesuit for 5 years. And what I found is so many of our seniors really hadn't gotten any exposure to financial literacy. So for most people, this isn't something that's very well understood. And yet it's not that complicated. Our objective today is to provide you with very simple financial life lessons for you to be able to manage your finances and become financially stable. And when I say it's not complicated, that doesn't mean it's easy. Those are two different things. So we're going to talk about some very simple life lessons, very understandable. You don't have to be great at math. You don't have to be a whiz with finances. And yet you have to make difficult choices. So it's not easy. It's sometimes difficult, but it's very understandable. So let's get started. I'm going to ask some questions, and if you'd like to respond in the chat room, that would be great. But I'm just going to go through these questions, and then I'll tell you the answer. So first of all, what % of workers are living paycheck to paycheck? I'll give you a second to think about that. The answer is actually 78% in the United States. 78% of workers in the US are living paycheck to paycheck. Second question, what % of workers making between $50,000 and $100,000 a year are in debt? Meaning they owe money to another party. The answer to that is 70%. And when polled, and there was a career builder survey that was done, more than half of those people felt like they would always be in debt. Third question, what % of Houstonians cannot afford a $400 emergency payment? This just recently came out in a survey done by the Kinder Institute, and the answer is 40%. 40% of Houstonians cannot afford a $400 emergency payment. And the total American credit card debt is close to $1 trillion. So I'd ask you, what does this tell you about Americans? What's happening in America? Well, I think the first thing is there's definitely growing inequality in the US, and that's one of the reasons I founded Career Spring. But there's an underlying challenge that we all face, and I'd say opportunity for our country. And that is that Americans like nice things, and Americans like to buy nice things. And unfortunately, very often they don't have the money to afford what they're buying. They're spending more money than they make. And that is the fundamental problem. And that is putting a lot of people into a financially unstable position. And what I'm here to tell you today is this being financially stable is very much inside your control. It's not easy. You have to make difficult choices, but it is in your control, and it's not very complicated. So let's get started. Rule number 1, don't spend more money than you make. Now, you may be thinking, I'm sure you're thinking, that seems easier said than done, Mr. Posoli, but let's assume for a second that we'll get to that part. This assumes that you're working in a living wage job. And a living wage job is the minimum income necessary for a worker to meet your basic needs of food, housing, clothing, etc. And the levels that I most recently in our research we found is $15 an hour for a single person without children, $18 an hour for 2 adults working with 2 children. Now, if you're not in that living wage job, rule number 1 is especially difficult. And I understand that. So I don't want to assume anything about your income level. But if you're not in a living wage job, this should really be your minimum goal. Get yourself into a living wage job. Now, you may need to go back to school to do that. It may be that you want to get a college degree, but it's not necessary to get a college degree to get to a living wage job. That could be one path, but you may also want to get into a middle skill role. There are great roles in the healthcare industry, in the energy industry, lots of different education that are paying living wages that don't require a 4-year bachelor's degree. You may need to go back to get a 2-year degree or a certificate, and that's something you'll need to consider. And if you're physically able, there's great demand for jobs like electrician and welder and plumber and those types of middle skill roles. And I've added here on the slide, upskillhouston.org. You can check it out. There are many different roles that you can see in that middle skill arena. But rule number one really assumes that you're in a living wage job. And assuming that you are, you need to do everything you can to follow rule number one. And often when I talk to students about this, I ask them to repeat it 3 times because it's that important. Don't spend more money than you make. Don't spend more money than you make. Don't spend more money than you make. And it requires relentless focus and discipline. And there are tools to help you along the way. A budget is a very helpful tool to help you stay on track. What is a budget? Again, we're going to use some terms here. I don't want you to feel like these things are too complicated. A budget is really simple. It's a plan for future income and expenditures that you can use as a guideline for spending and saving. Let me make it even more simple. And you can do it on a little yellow sticky on your desk. What do you have coming in? How much money do you have coming in? And how much money do you have going out? And where is it going? And it's a plan. So for next month, I think I have this much coming in, and I expect to spend this much on the following items. That's all a budget is. It's just a plan. So you add up your monthly income, and this is after taxes. You estimate your expenses. You look at the difference. You make sure that the income is greater than the expenses. If it's not, you need to go back and make changes to your expenses, right? This is a plan. So if you're planning to spend more money than you make, we need to go back and change that plan. And then over time, you track that budget versus what you actually spent to make sure that you're staying on track. Let's go through fixed and variable expenses, because when you do your budget, when you plan out your expenses, some of those expenses are fixed. Those are expenses that don't change month to month. Fixed expenses. What would be some of those expenses? Can you think of expenses that would be fixed? They don't change based on your behavior. They're the same every month. They're very close to being the same. And if you want to include those in the chat room, you can. But expenses like rent, a car payment, cell phones very often are fixed. These are things, insurance payments. These are things that you must pay. And once you buy a car, you must then pay. Of course, you don't have to have a car, but once you buy a car, you must pay. These are fixed expenses. Variable expenses are expenses that fluctuate based on your actions. Well, tonight I'd like to go out to dinner instead of cooking at home. I'd really like to go to the movies this weekend. These are variable expenses. I'm going to go to the mall and buy myself a new pair of shoes. Variable expenses. They're not fixed. They're based on your actions. So let's look at some examples. I mentioned some of these already. For this person, fixed expenses, rent $600, car loan $200, insurance $200, cell phone $100, utilities, paying your electricity, your natural gas, savings $100. We're going to get back to this, but I will make the argument that savings is a fixed expense for you. We'll talk about that later. And then variable expenses, occasional spending, That one always gets us, I think, doesn't it? Groceries, entertainment, gas. Now, you may say, look, groceries, I have to eat. Why would that be considered variable? And I'd say you're right. But all of us know that when you go grocery shopping, very often you can get the more expensive items or the less expensive items, right? And so if you make it a variable expense and you know how much you're going to spend for the month, you're more likely to stay within budget. The other thing I'll say to you, and this, you may find this to be more humorous than anything else, but don't go to the grocery store hungry. You know, all of us, if you go to the grocery store and you haven't eaten for a while, you're going to spend more money than if you just had a lunch or something else. So that's a little helpful tip that isn't on the slide here. But don't go to the grocery store hungry. But here's your fixed expenses and your variable expenses. One of the challenges that we have for a lot of people is staying on track, right? So we do the budget, but then, so let's look at this budget. Somebody does their budget. They have income of $2,000 for the month after taxes. They planned, as we saw on the last page, $1,400 of that would be spent fixed. $600 of that would be spent on variable expenses. So their total expenses would be $2,000, and they'd have a balanced budget, meaning they've got a plan and they'll have nothing left over. But remember, we had some savings in there for $100. And then look at the actuals. So this person had $2,000 still coming in. Fixed expenses don't change, but variable expenses went up. So we spent more than we expected to spend. We thought we'd spend $600. Our total expenses turned out to be $2,200 because we spent $800 on variable. So the difference, now we're short $200. We spent more money than we make. We've broken rule number one. We had a budget, we had a plan, but we broke it. Now, some of you are disciplined enough to stay on the budget. Most of us are not. If discipline is a problem, you may want to try the envelope system. And I'm going to quickly talk to you about the envelope system because it may be a tool that's helpful for you. Just like a typical budget, you know how much money's coming in for income. And then you have your expenses. The fixed expenses are expenses that are not going to change. For those expenses, you can often get automatic withdrawals from your bank account to pay your rent, to pay your car payment. Those things are just taken out automatically. The envelope system is making an assumption about people's behavior, that people are less likely to spend more money when they're using cash, actual dollars, than if they're using their credit card or a debit card. And we're going to talk about a credit card in a bit. So in the envelope system, you would actually, going back to these variable expenses, you would actually put in an envelope for each month $75 and write on the side of the envelope occasional spending, $300 in another envelope and write groceries, and then get another envelope and write entertainment $150, another envelope gas $75. And for the month, you have $300 of cash in that envelope. That's what will be used for grocery shopping. If you get to the grocery store and you only have $100 left in there and your bill is $110, well, then you have to put back $10 worth of grocery items. You've got to stay within the envelope system. You have to stay within what's in that envelope for the month. That forces a discipline that for many of us is very difficult without that kind of system. So that may be something that you want to consider, the envelope system. And if you want to talk about that at the end for Q&A, I'm happy to talk about that. So that is the end of part one. This concludes part one. So I'll pause here and see if there are any questions before we go to part two.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Posoli. It's really interesting for me, especially like hearing someone who is telling us to how to save money, like telling us to pay ourselves first because usually when we think about saving, we don't think spend money on ourselves, right? I don't at all. So it's really nice hearing someone say that we should treat ourselves first, even ask for spending money. Now we will go towards our second poll questions. And let me pull up the second poll question for you here. So you can see the question on the screen. It says, why should we save money for the future? So you have four options. The number one option is helps protect you in the event of a financial emergency. The second option is helps you feel relaxed. And the third one is reduces financial stress. And the last one is all of the above. So I'm waiting for your responses now. Again, I'm giving you a moment to click on your responses. Okay, I can see your participation here. So let me share the result with you. So, okay, so in this second poll, all the attendees are saying that all of the above is the correct answer. So 100% are agreed with the last option, all of the above. Thank you for your participation. Now, again, I would like to request Mr. Posoli to take over. Mr. Posoli, please.
Well, that was a good segue to the next section, because the next section, make sure I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, we go. Is about paying yourself first, and so what I want you to think about, and I mentioned this earlier, is that savings needs to be a fixed expense, and I would target 10% of your income. That's difficult to do, but let's talk about this being a fixed expense versus a variable expense. Most people think about savings as something that if I have some money left over at the end of the month, then maybe I'll save it, put it into savings. And what I'd like you to think about is that you're the one who is working hard. You're the one that's putting in the time and the effort and working hard to get paid every 2 weeks or every week, whatever it is. And yet when you get paid, you end up paying everyone else. You don't actually pay yourself. And so I'd urge us all to consider paying yourself first. Pay yourself first. You're the one that worked hard. Make sure that savings is a fixed expense. And we're going to talk about how to set up a savings account. And to do that, to be able to pay yourself first, you're going to have to make difficult choices. I told you this wasn't going to be easy. It's not complicated, but it's not easy. You need to make difficult choices. And it starts with, what do I want versus what do I need? What do I want versus what do I need? And most Americans don't do a very good job on that. So for example, car. Well, most people want to get a nicer car. They're thinking about that. In fact, young people especially, they get their first job and they want to go out and get a really nice car or whatever they can afford. And what I'd say to you is, 20% max of what your income is should be car and possibly even the insurance. Now, that's not going to be, if you're not making a lot of money, that won't be a very big number. But that doesn't mean you can't get a good car. It just means you may not be able to get the car that your dream car early on in your life. And that's okay. My first car, I lived in Miami and I worked at Cooper's and Libran, as you heard in my biography. So I was an accountant wearing a suit every day. And my first car didn't have air conditioning. And people would say to me, "Are you crazy? My air conditioning broke and it was going to be $800 to fix it." And I decided to, for the first year, not have air conditioning in my car. And so that was a choice I made, a difficult choice. And I was able to save thousands of dollars because every month I was able to, save the money that I would have otherwise spent on a new car. So that's number one. The other thing is home. Where do you live? And especially for the young people, if you can live at home with your parents, try to do that. But let's say you're in a situation where you're not a young person who can live at home with their parents, or maybe even have a family. Choices about where to live. You could stretch for a more expensive apartment, try to find the lower expense apartment. Try to find roommates if you don't have a family yet. My first living arrangement after college, when I had my job as an accountant, I lived in a house with 3 people. We had one very small bathroom, which wasn't very nice at all. And again, I was paying, I think, $250 a month. Now I'm an older guy, so there's inflation, but the situation was I could have easily been spending $700 or $800 a month, or maybe even $1,000 in a much nicer place. So live at home if possible. Get roommates if you're in a position where you can do that. Keep your costs down. Don't drink Starbucks. Okay, I know everyone loves coffee, or most people love Starbucks, but I'd urge you to make choices to find the less expensive options in your life. Okay, if you like coffee, make your own coffee. I'm sure actually you can go down and get Starbucks flavored coffee, right? And make it yourself. Or get the coffee that costs $1 instead of $6 every morning. This is an important point. Don't drink Starbucks is something that I've told the students over the years, because it's something they can really, it's a very relevant opportunity to save money. And you may be thinking, well, it's only $5 a day, $5 or $6 a day. And I really like the caramel macchiato, whatever. And I get that. But if you could save that $5 a day over the course of 25 years. So let's say when I first got out of college, I was drinking Starbucks every day. But instead of doing that, I just saved the $5 or $6 a day and I invested that in the stock market. Believe it or not, you'd have close to $400,000 today. So think about that for a second. Starbucks versus making my own coffee with $400,000. So that's something that over time will make a big difference if you can be careful and save your money and avoid things like that. There's also a huge benefit to saving early in your life due to compound interest. Now, I promised you that I wasn't going to complicate things. So I'm not going to do much on compound interest other than to tell you what it is and then tell you it doesn't matter that much as long as you trust me to start early in your life. But compound interest is the interest on both your principal and the interest on your interest. Now, don't worry about that definition. What I'd like you to think about is just, it's important to save early. It's important to save early. There's massive benefits to it. And there's an image here of savings is like a snowball rolling down a hill. And for those of you that have never made a snowman, you may not know this, but when you make a snowman, or if you see a snowball rolling down a hill, it starts off very small and you roll the snowball and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's how you make a snowman. Well, snowball works the same way. If it starts small at the top of the hill when you're young, like savings, start when you're 18 and you roll it, it can get very big by the bottom of the hill. If you wait till the middle of the hill and start with a little snowball, it can't get very big by the time you're my age, by the time you're older. So you want to start as early as possible in your life. That's not to say that if you're late in your later years, it's too late. It's never too late to save, but we want to start as early as possible. So back to paying yourself first. How to do that? Well, I think many people are sometimes concerned about banks. That's something I've heard from families from Cristo Rey Jesuit over time, that they're concerned about putting money at the bank. And what I'd say is, let's target 3 months' salary in a savings account and understand that your money is actually insured by the federal government. So if you put money in a savings account and the bank for some reason went under, it went bankrupt, you would still get your money back. Up to $250,000 is insured by the federal government. So as we're talking about setting up a small savings account to get things started for 3 months of your salary, it is insured by the federal government. When you're watching commercials and you hear FDIC insured, that's what that means. So it's safe. Setting up a savings account is very easy. Just go into a local bank, set up the savings account. They'll take you through the steps, and then you could start depositing money in your savings account. Now, savings is not investing. You're getting very little reward, but there is practically no risk. And so this chart that you can see here has reward on one side and risk on the other. And cash or savings accounts are down here. You're going to get less than 1% interest. So it's a very low reward. You're not getting much back for your money, but you're also not taking much risk. And yet, as you go further up here for investing, as you start investing in things like real estate or stocks, you can now then start taking more risk, and you could have more reward, but you are taking more risk. So if you get to the point where you've saved some money in your savings account and you're looking to maybe possibly make investments, I'd like you to follow a few guidelines. First one is be patient. I think when you're getting started, very often you're looking for ways to build up your income and build up your net worth as quickly as possible. And I'd say avoid that. Try to really avoid that. You're going to have people offer you things when you have some money in savings accounts. People will come to you and say, hey, would you like to invest in my business? Maybe it's a cousin. Maybe it's a sibling. Maybe it's just a friend. Maybe it's someone you don't even know. Avoid those at all costs. So people are going to come to you and say, if you give me $5,000 today, I'll give you back $10,000 in 6 months. Don't do it. I know you're going to want to do it because you're thinking about the 10,000, but I want you to think about losing the 5,000. You want to start with very safe investments. One of the safest things you can do with the best return is if you work at a company and they have a retirement plan, a 401k match program, where if you put $1 in, they will match you with $1. If you put $1,000 in, they will match you with $1,000. So you're getting 100% return. You're doubling your money just by putting money into that 401k retirement plan up to the match from the company. So you want to look for things like that. And if you wanted to invest in stocks, I know right now Bitcoin is a very popular thing, cryptocurrency. I think you want to avoid those because they're incredibly volatile, meaning the prices go up and down dramatically. Try to avoid things like that. The stock market, as you can see on this chart, it is more risky, but over 20 or 30 years, it has proven to be the best risk return of all these alternatives. And so if that's something you want to do, look for a diversified index of the entire stock market as opposed to picking one stock. Like, don't take your money and just invest in one stock that you think would be a great stock. Be very careful about that because you may be wrong. Whereas if you invest in an index, which you can do at any of the brokerage firms, so Charles Schwab, E-Trade, Fidelity, Vanguard, any of those accounts that you set up, they all have indexes that you can invest in. I'm happy to answer questions about that too. And then the last point about keys to investing, and it's aligned with point number one, is don't buy lottery tickets. If you're someone who's been buying lottery tickets every week, stop doing that. Take the $10, just like the Starbucks, and save that money. Over the course of 20 or 30 years, I promise you, if you invest that money as opposed to buying lottery tickets, you'll be better off in the long run. Now, you're missing the opportunity to potentially win the massive lottery payout, but the odds are so low that I think it's in your best interest to avoid lottery tickets or anything that looks like lottery tickets in your life. So that is the end of section 2. And I'm happy to answer questions, or I think I'll hand it over back to Ms. Dilshad.
Thank you again, Mr. Posoli, for that very valuable information. I remember the first conversation that we had, you brought up how one of your former students wanted to buy a new car and you advised them not to do. So it reminds me of how we all usually get so wrapped up in wanting nice things. Like you said, that we don't stop to consider if we are making the right financial choices in the long run. Again, thank you, Mr. Posoli, for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. Once again, everyone, if you all have any questions at all, you may ask them at any point during the presentation in the Q&A box, and they will be answered at the end of the webinar during the Q&A portion. Let's move on to our final question. So we are going to our final poll question now. So you can see the poll question on your Zoom screen. So the question is, what are some risks of using a credit card? So again, we have four options. The first one is temptation to cover, to overspend, risk of running your credit score, helps you to establish credit and create financial freedom. So I'm giving you a moment to click on your responses again. So you can see the question on your Zoom screen only. If anyone want to participate from a Facebook page, you can write your answer in the comment option so we can get your answer as well. Okay, let me share the poll answer with you. So we have 100% are agreed with the first option, temptation to overspend. So thank you everyone for your participation in our last poll. So we are very close to our ending part now. And we will now move on to our speaker's final part of his presentation. Mr. Posoli.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
So the last section or last point that I want to leave you with is to avoid credit card debt. And when I use the term debt, let me explain it quickly. Debt is created when one party borrows money from another party. And typically what happens is that needs to be repaid with the cost of interest. So if you borrow $1,000 from a bank or someone else with a 10% interest rate, you'll need to give back 1,100 at the end of a year. That's debt. And I'm not suggesting that you should avoid all debt. It's not always a bad thing. A home mortgage could be a very good thing. If you are paying rent and now you can afford to buy a home, to buy the home, you'll need to take out a loan from the bank. And every time you pay down the loan, the principal piece of the loan, you're now owning a small piece of your home. And that could be a really good thing. So debt isn't always a bad thing. And school loans, if you're going to school and you're going to take on loans in a form that is something that you believe you could repay after you finish college, I typically would tell our students that, between 5,000 is a good number per year of school loans, that if you graduated with 5,000 to 7,000, 20,000 to 30,000 of loans at the end of 4 years with a bachelor's degree, that is something that's manageable. If you were going to leave with $150,000 of loans, that's probably not a manageable number. So you have to take that in consideration. But debt isn't always a bad thing. What I would like you to consider today is to avoid credit card debt, retail card debt, payday loans, cash advances, all the higher interest loans and very punitive loans, including auto loans, certain auto loans. You need to really read and understand what the rate is on auto loans, because those could be incredibly punitive too. But let's talk about credit cards. What are credit cards and how do they work? A credit card, unlike a debit card, when you have your debit card, you're basically just taking money from your account. So if you use your debit card and you had $100 in your checking account and you use your debit card for 50, you're taking that money and then you'll have 50 left over. A credit card is a license to borrow money from a financial institution or a bank. It's literally a loan. And the way it works after you've been approved is the bank or the financial institution is approving you for a certain level. And then as you start spending money, at the end of every month, they will tell you where you spent money, itemize the list, and they will give you the option to pay it all down, pay it all off at the end of the month, or pay a minimum payment. If you don't pay it all down and you only make a minimum payment, you're going to be charged interest on the remaining portion. And that is some of the highest cost interest that's out there. So the average annual percentage rate that's used that you hear the APR, the average for credit cards is 14.5%. So just think about that for a second. That's a very, very expensive option. Credit cards can be very dangerous. Remember that banks are doing this to make money. That doesn't mean banks are bad people. That doesn't mean that it's a bad business. It just means that they're doing this to make money. And you want to try to avoid credit card debt, which means if you have a credit card, pay it down every month. I'm going to try to show a video right now, and let's see if I can make this happen.
Today we're going to look at compound interest. Today we're going to look at
a lot of people don't know this, but the best way to make money with Amazon.
I was going to show you a video, and of course that went sideways on me. I'm going to go back to this. The video basically talked about the problem with compound interest and how if you have credit card debt over time, if you build credit card debt, it's almost impossible if you get to a certain level and the interest rate gets up into the mid-20s, because if you miss a payment, interest rates will go up. So your 14.5% could go to 25%. And he used an example of $30,000 at 14%. And when it goes to 28%, the credit card debt would take 400 years to pay down. So sorry about the malfunction there. But the bottom line is it's very dangerous and it's very hard to get out of credit card debt. Okay, but are there benefits to credit cards? What could be some of the benefits to credit cards and the credit score? You may have heard the term credit score. Let's talk about it for a second. It basically measures a person's ability to repay their debt. So if you're someone that was going to lend money to an individual, you want to understand, am I going to get repaid or not? And that's what the credit score is trying to do. It's measuring a person's ability to repay. It's a number. It's calculated using a number of different variables. Some of the things that they're going to take into consideration, not surprising, is the history of your payments. Have you made on-time payments? If you have, your credit score will go higher. If you're late, your credit score goes lower. If you're not paying down your credit score goes lower. If you have lower balances on your credit cards, your credit score will be higher. If you're not asking for lots of different credit cards, your credit score will go higher. The things that will hurt you, later missed payments, high credit card balances, requests for multiple credit cards, these are all things that will hurt you. Why does a credit score matter? Well, it comes down to the fact that people that are institutions that are going to lend you money, whether it's for a car or a house or a business, they're going to look at your credit score. And it could be the difference between getting a 4% loan and a 6% loan or a 7% loan or even higher. If your credit score is very bad, you may not be able to get a loan for a house. And if you can get a loan, it's going to be a much higher interest rate than if you have a very good credit score. So you want to figure out what your credit score is, take the time to go out and check your credit score, and then do what you can by making payments on time and ensuring you don't miss any payments for any of your expenses to get your credit score as high as possible. Well, how to use credit cards the right way? Let's start with using cash first. I love the envelope system. Let's not use credit cards at all unless you need them for emergencies or large purchases when you have the cash. So let's say you have $1,000 in your bank account and you're going to buy a TV and the TV is $500 and you want to use your credit card to get some points on your credit card or for your credit score, but you're at the end of the month, when you get the bill, you're going to pay down the full amount. That's great. As long as you're sure you're going to pay down the full amount. The problem will be if you buy the TV and you use your credit card and then the bill comes and you said, you know what? I'm just going to pay down the minimum and I'll just pay the 15% interest. That was a very bad decision. Pay down your balance every month to zero. choose the lowest cost credit cards and read the fine print. There's a lot of really bad credit cards you want to avoid. Take the time to read them. Find the lower interest rate credit cards. You can get credit cards for less than 10% interest. Even though we know we're not going to run a balance, you want the lower cost credit cards just in case. So that's the section on avoiding debt. I mean, let's just wrap up with a quick summary before we go to Q&A. Number one, don't spend more money than you make. Repeat that over and over. And remember, there's tools you can use like budgets to stay on course. If you have a problem with discipline, you can use the envelope system. Pay yourself first and save early, because saving is like a snowball rolling down a hill. Look for safe investments. If you're going to start investing, because savings is not investing, if you're going to start investing, look for safe investments and avoid get-rich-quick schemes. Don't buy lottery tickets. Avoid Starbucks. Avoid credit card debt. That does not to say that you can't have a credit card for emergency purposes, but pay it down every month. And credit rating or credit score matters. So take the time to check out what your credit score is. There's lots of programs out there where you can see your credit score, and then do your best to keep your rating as high as possible. So that's it. I'm going to stop the share and hand it back to Ms. Dipshot.
Thank you, Mr. Posoli, for sharing your knowledge with us. And now I'm going to move toward the questions and answer portion of the webinar. If you didn't share your questions, please feel free to send them now. So there are so many amazing questions are still coming, and this has been just incredible. So let me share the questions from my Q&A portion. Let's talk about the question 1. We have an attendee, she's asking about that. It has been 4 years, me living in United States. I couldn't save the amount I had targeted. Now I want to buy a truck to run intrastate loads. So I want to run it under another authority and they're paying 15% to the company. Is it a good decision?
Can you repeat the buy the truck to do what?
She's saying that the buy a truck to run intrastate. Like, even I didn't get her questions. Like,
oh, okay. To actually be in the trucking business, to move product.
Right. So she's talking about, said that, like, I want to run it under another authority and they're paying 15% to the company. So, like, is it a good decision? So what do you think about this question? How can you?
Well, there's a lot of details to better understand, and I don't want to sway you the wrong way, but 15% is very expensive. If it was month to month, so what I mean by that is you can use the truck and 15% of some dollar amount is what you pay at the end of the month. And if you make more than that, it's working out. And the next month, you don't have to do it again. I think that's okay. What I'd be very careful about is, or I'd avoid is, I'm going to take out a 5-year loan at 15%. Because if you're in the 5th or 6th month and you can't afford to pay that because you're not making enough at moving product, that can be very dangerous. And I'd also say, if you're someone who's trained to be, if you have a CDL or whatever the right certificate is for that kind of truck, there's a great shortage right now for truck workers. So people that are drivers, if you're a truck driver and you're trained that way, or if you can get trained, they're making $75, $90, $100,000+ a year because there's just a shortage of truck drivers. So I would do that for a while until you can get your own truck, or until you have enough saved up to where you can get a much cheaper loan.
Okay, great. I hope, Ms. Seaman, you got the answer and it's going to help you to some extent. Thank you for sharing, Mr. Posoli. So I have another question. What is the best way to start and build credit and also raise the credit score?
Yeah, so you can't build credit unless you actually have borrowed money in some way, or you have expenses that must be paid on time. So if you have an apartment and you're paying rent every month, and you're paying your utility, you're paying Reliant, NRG, whoever you're buying electricity from, and you're paying it always on time, always early, never missing. You just can't miss. If you miss a payment, that's where problems start. And then to the extent that you get a credit card and you buy a few things on the credit card, but you pay it down at the end of every month. So when the bill comes and you have $120 on the bill, you pay it entirely, 120, the full amount. That will help you start building credit, and it will raise your credit score.
Right. Thank you. Okay, one more question is, hello, I think that I saw someone ask this, but I didn't catch the answer. So she's asking about, do you know of any good apps that helps with budgeting or investing?
Apps?
Yeah, she's asking about the apps.
Yeah, I did. You can Google them. I would say to just find it a free app. There's a bunch out there. I thought I saw something in my notes. I've never used them, but there is I can find it probably while we're talking here. I've lost it, but I would say just literally do a search, Google search for free budget apps, and they're all pretty much the same because it's so simple, right? You're going to put in what you make, you're going to put in your expenses, it's going to show your balance, but make sure you're doing one that's free. There are free budget apps. Do not pay something for it because you could do just as good a job on a little piece of paper.
Okay, thank you. And I hope Samantha got the answer from Mr. Posoli. Okay, let's move to another question. It's about which is the most safest stock one should invest, if not Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
Well, the one stock, I would try to avoid one stock. I mean, I have views on which stocks are my favorite, but I don't think this is the right form for that because I could be wrong. And what I'd say to you is, if you're starting to save money, you can invest in an index that represents the overall stock market. So the S&P 500 is an index that represents how all those 500 largest U.S. stocks have done for the day. So if the S&P 500 is up 5% on the year, your investment would be up 5%. There's an index, an ETF called SPY. SPY, it represents the overall U.S. stock market, the S&P 500. If the S&P 500, all the stocks are down 10%, you'll be down 10%. But you're getting a much more diversified and less risky investment. Once you've made, you saved enough money to where you feel like you're in very good shape, you've got savings for 3 months of your salary, you have investments in the index, at that point, then you can start looking at individual stocks. And I think different approaches that you can take, I really like Warren Buffett's rules. If you look at Warren Buffett's 10 rules for investing in stocks, he's got some really basic rules that I think are great to follow. So I'd say start with an index. And if you want to pick individual stocks, spend some time looking at Warren Buffett's 10 rules for how to choose stocks.
Okay, great. Thank you. We are getting amazing questions now. So I'm trying to pick the one they are kind of different from each other. So let's talk about, can making 2 payments a month on your credit card helps increase your credit score?
I think yes. Well, it's a matter of paying down the loan. So if by making 2 payments enables you to do that in a more disciplined way, then I think that's true. Or you can save the money and do it 1 time a month, but double the amount that you would have otherwise done. The point is you want to pay down your whatever the loan is as quickly as possible. So if you said to me, I have $3,000 in credit card debt and I have certain amount of money over here, saving money at 1%. I'm going to say use as much of your money as you can practically use to pay down the credit card debt as fast as possible, because that's the most expensive debt and the most dangerous. But yes, I like the idea of paying it twice or just saving the full amount of the two payments and paying it once, but paying double.
Oh, thank you. Okay, let's go for this question. Bitcoins and cryptocurrency, should I invest in this latest crazy? Is that a good investment, or should I put that money somewhere else? What do you suggest for them?
Well, I was saying earlier that I'd suggest avoiding cryptocurrency. Now, it's possible that it could go a lot higher. I'm not about to say that it's not. It's just very dangerous. For example, Bitcoin was trading at as high as $67,000 a coin about a month ago. Today, it's 38,000. So if you had invested a month ago in Bitcoin, you would have lost half your money. Now, it's possible it goes back up, but it's also possible it goes all the way to zero. So it's a dangerous thing. Why do people think cryptocurrency is a good idea? Is primarily because the US government, especially, but most governments are printing a lot of US dollars. We're trying to get out of our problems by making more dollars. And what people that are big supporters of cryptocurrency believe is that there will be inflation, and that avoiding holding US dollars is a safer way to go. So they're saying invest in cryptocurrency to avoid the inflation risk. Depending on how much money you have, if you're just trying to save a few months of your salary to build a saving and start investing, what you can have is an occurrence where you lose everything, right? So we want to avoid those types of things. We want to avoid investing in things that are very risky, that move very quickly. Avoid it, investing in friends, businesses where you could lose all your money. Focus on safe investments.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Posoli. It looks like it's getting more interactive and more engaging session, but the time doesn't allow me to continue. So thank you, Mr. Posoli, for your time and knowledge contribution and making this even more engaging through your inspirational discussion.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. Now, I want to thank all of you who registered and participated in our webinar session. I hope you all have learned as many new things from our guest speaker's presentation as I have. As we mentioned earlier, our webinars are recorded and will be available on our social media platforms in the next couple of days. Also, please follow us on our social media platforms to stay updated on our upcoming webinars. Now, I would like to take some time to once again thank our RF panelists, Mr. Farino, Ms. Salinas, and today's guest speaker, Mr. Paul Posoli, for making today's webinar possible. And for our listeners, if you have any children who are or will be the first generation college students, be sure to check out and support Mr. Posoli's nonprofit organization, Career Spring at careerspring.org. This is a place where you can connect with advisors from all different career paths for school and career advice. This has been such an amazing and fruitful webinar, so thank you all for being here. Okay, I also want to mention RFUSA is producing bi-monthly series of webinars on different emerging themes, and we will be pushing up the next webinars about improving mental health in Himalayan mountain villages. Prevention first. This mental health webinar will be presented by Dr. Syed Mehboob Shah, professor and the World Heart Federation Emerging Leader for NCDS Prevention Institute of Public Health, College of Medicine and Health Sciences UAE, on the basis of his current research findings. We are sending out the invitation today, so please be sure to get registered and share with your friends, colleagues, and loved ones to get a chance to attend this important session. Once again, thank you everyone for staying with us. And have a wonderful day ahead. Take care. Thank you, Mr. Posoli, once again.
Thank you.